Welcome to the latest in this advanced series of ADF Insider. My name's Grant Ronald and I'm here with Lynn Munsinger Brown. We're both product managers in Oracle's Application Development Tools Group. And today we're going to show you a session on redeveloping Oracle Forms applications using Oracle JDeveloper and Oracle ADF. Now, the overview for this session will be I'll first of all outline the strategy that we have with Oracle Forms, some things to consider if and when you look at redeveloping applications using ADF. I'll make a short comparison of Forms and ADF so you can see where many of the concepts can map, but there are also differences as well. And then the focus of this presentation will be on the experiences myself and Lynn have had in rebuilding a Forms application. And we'll show you demonstrations of how you can build the data model, how you can add the validation and business rules that exist in your Forms application into the ADF applications, and then how to build the user interface. And then we'll finish up the session with some final thoughts that you might want to take away with you if you're about to embark on a redevelopment project of Forms to Oracle ADF. So the first thing we'd probably like to establish up front is our strategy with Oracle Forms, and we hopefully have a clear message, which is that we currently have no plans to de-support Oracle Forms. So Oracle Forms is still part of Oracle's Fusion middleware, and currently Oracle Forms 11G R2 is the latest release. And our strategy is upgrade and integrate. So upgrade to the latest version of Forms, integrate with technologies and functionality of the Fusion middleware platform, which is now based on WebLogic Server. We also want to see the ability for customers or developers who have traditionally been from a Forms background to be able to explore and exploit features of other technologies like the JEE stack, the Java stack as well. And so we're trying to build a very familiar development environment that those traditional Oracle developers can feel comfortable with if they move to these new technologies. And we want to make it clear that we're not forcing people to migrate off of Forms to any other technology. Redevelopment of a Forms application or migration of a Forms application is a considerable redevelopment effort, and it's our view that there's no silver or magic bullet that can magically take you from Forms to J2E applications without involving considerable amounts of redevelopment or with high amounts of risk or cost associated with it as well. So that's our strategy with Oracle Forms. Now, I've mentioned that redeveloping a Forms application is a considerable effort, and this screenshot maybe just shows you an idea of why it's a considerable effort. On the left we have what's a typical Forms application. On the right is a screenshot from one of our Fusion applications, which is based on Oracle ADF. And as you can see, although applications might be doing a very similar role of data entry or presenting information for manipulation by the user, the style of application that can be built with ADF is fundamentally very different from those CRUD style of applications you may be built with Forms. So redeveloping a Forms application in ADF might involve you embracing changes, and that might be changes in the UI or the ability to do things in a way that you didn't have available when you first redeveloped your application in Oracle Forms. So it is a chance to do things differently. You might develop the UI in a new way. You might have a different flow through the application. You might be using different UI controls. Again, UI controls in ADF like carousels or hierarchy charts or data visualization components give you the opportunity to display information in completely different ways than you had with Oracle Forms. You might do things differently because your business processes are different. So 15 years ago when you built your Forms applications, your expenses system was input by professional data entry staff. But maybe now you have a change in business processes and people are inputting their expenses online in a self-service application. So maybe you'll do things differently as well. It might be that your applications are now available in or through different channels, such as the internet or mobile applications. And again, that would require you to probably redevelop the application in a very different way from the way you developed it with Oracle Forms. The fourth option we have here is new technologies. When you developed your Forms applications, you may well have handwritten PL/SQL code to perform things like batch processing or a workflow and approvals process. It may well be that there are much easier technologies or tools that you could exploit to do that same behavior than writing the code yourself. For example, an approvals process, rather than being handwritten code, you might use some sort of Beeple workflow. Or you might decide to embrace technologies like Web Center, where you can allow customization and personalization of your application by the end user, a feature that if you wanted to present to through a Forms application would have to be custom coded to have that same ability. And you might remove some of your business rules that are hard coded within Forms and put them into some sort of rules engine, which gives the application a lot of flexibility to adapt to business process change. Rather than going in and changing the application, you can change your business rules through some separate user interface. So redeveloping a Forms application in whatever technology is a chance to do things differently as well. And that's why when you redevelop an application, it could be a considerable effort, because you're taking the opportunity of doing things very differently than rather than a one-to-one migration. So while you might be embracing the change involved with new technologies, you don't want to throw away all the investment you have in your developers or your applications that you've had with Oracle Forms. So with Oracle ADF, we give you a framework and building blocks, many of which have concepts that can be mapped back to the Forms world. This means if you're redeveloping a Forms application, there's parts of your Forms applications that fit comfortably with the various features of Oracle ADF as well. And the advantage here is that although there's a mapping of concepts between Forms and ADF, the ADF features are still based on common design patterns that Java developers will understand. So this isn't all about making things look like Forms, but it allows you the mapping of concepts using features that even Java developers will understand as well. ADF is based on standards, it's heavily driven by declarative development, and a lot of the development you do in ADF is metadata driven, not code, which again is very similar to the experience you had with Oracle Forms as well. It's also worth recognizing that Oracle ADF is the same technology that we're using with our Fusion applications, many of which were originally based in Oracle Forms as well. So this is the framework and the technology that we have used as well for our redevelopment of our Forms applications. So let's very quickly look at Oracle Forms, because Forms itself was a framework. It provided a lot of building blocks and functionality for you so that you didn't have to code these things yourself. So if we could take the outer layer off of Oracle Forms, we could see that we've got an interface into the database, a SQL interface. You have something called a record manager, which is responsible for storing records as you query them back from the database. And those records are presented to the developer via a Forms block. Now, around the Forms block, you can add lots of triggers, and those triggers are executed in a PL/SQL engine. And the whole of the business process here that you develop in Forms is exposed to your end users through a user interface, which is actually rendered as a Java applet. So that's how Forms work under the covers. And if we look at Oracle ADF, it's based on a three-tier architecture where we have our business service, which is separate from our user interface development technology, if it's wireless or web clients you're using, and you have a controller which is responsible for the application flow. So we can actually make some very broad mappings of Forms to the ADF architecture. So the part of Forms which was responsible for querying data, the definition of your blocks, and any triggers associated with that can be broadly mapped to the business services of ADF. Any UI triggers and the definition of the UI and the classes that were used to render the user interface in Oracle Forms broadly maps to the view layer of ADF as well. And in Forms you could write explicit navigation code where you'd maybe go to a particular item or block, or Forms took care of some of the navigation for you. We use function keys, for example, or tabbing around screens. And essentially that's what the controller in ADF is doing as well. So if we look into further details, ADF Business Components, which is one of the technologies for building the business services in ADF, we have entity objects, view objects, and application modules. Well, broadly speaking, the entity object in ADF is performing a similar function to the Forms Record Manager. It's responsible for caching data from the database into your application. View objects in ADF are really just the same concept as a Forms block. So a Forms block defined which attributes you were querying back, and you could define elements to the block such as properties such as the where clause or the order by clause to shape the data views. And the application module in ADF is actually performing a similar function to the form. It's a grouping of transaction into a use case or a specific container, which is exactly as you do as a form. So broadly we can see there are some mappings between the concepts you've been using in Oracle Forms and concepts in ADF as well. So let's have a look at the application that we redeveloped. We chose the Oracle Summit application, which is an application sample used in our Oracle University courses, as a typical example of a Forms application which we used for redevelopment in ADF. Now the goal of this application is to manage customers, orders, order items. So a very typical Forms scenario. And what we wanted to do was redevelop that application to give you the same functionality, but also where we saw opportunities to do things differently in the ADF version of the application, we took that chance as well. So we didn't look to create an exact mirror image of the original application. As you can see, some things that in terms of the layout look very different where we could embrace the change, and so we did that. But essentially we tried to keep the core functionality the same in this application. So the original Forms application was based on a number of database tables, and so in redeveloping the Forms application in ADF, we wanted to build our new business service based on those same database tables. So we had to make a first cut of a business service based on customers, orders, order items, products tables. There was also relationships between those tables or those blocks in the Forms world. So a customer had many orders, an order had many items. So we had to ensure that master detail functionality was still there in the ADF application. A very common feature in Forms application is the use of a post query. So a post query trigger can be used to look up, for example, a product's name or a product's description based on the product ID, or a customer's name or a sales rep's name based on their ID. So those are very common Forms features that we also had to implement in the ADF application. So let's hand over to Lynn and show how we did this first cut of the business service.
Thanks, Grant. So this is JDeveloper 11G Release 2. You can always download the most recent release of JDeveloper from OTN. If you Google JDeveloper, you will see the first hit takes you to the JDeveloper homepage on OTN, and from there you can choose the downloads link to start downloading JDeveloper and get started. So let's get started with our own application development here. So we're going to create a back office application to view orders by customer based on our existing Summit schema. So I'll go ahead and create a new application. I'll base it on the Fusion Web Application template. And I'll give it a name and a package prefix. A couple of projects are created for me, Model and View Controller, for this Fusion application template. I'll start by creating the building blocks of the application based on our Summit schema. So I'll create new business components from tables, and I'll connect to the Summit schema. Now the first thing that we'll create are entity objects. I'll put them in their own package so that we can delineate them later. These are similar to the record manager in Forms. So I'll go ahead and query the database, and I'll choose the objects for which I want to create entity objects. And I'll go ahead and rename these to get rid of the extraneous S that's included as part of the table name. And the next objects that we'll create are entity-based view objects. So these are the views for the application, or similar to the Forms data block. And I'll create all of these objects as view objects. I won't create any query-based view objects at this time. And I'm going to skip the application module creation so that we can do that manually, so you can see that very important step. I will create a diagram so that we can see all of the objects. So if we look at the diagram, we see that there's relations between each of the objects. Customers related to orders, related to items, etc. We expect that. There's another relation that is included in the schema, or present in the schema, but it's not actually a foreign key relationship, and so the wizard didn't pick it up. And so we can both use what the wizard creates for us, as well as augment the framework to include our own rules. And one of our business rules here is that there's a relationship between inventory and item. And so I can build that new link in just by creating a new view link. And I'll name this inventory for product item. And I'll select the objects that relate to one another, which is the product ID attribute for both item and inventory. So now I've created that relationship, and that's reflected in the framework objects that I've created. Now I can go ahead and create the application module. So I'll create this new application module, which serves as a group of transactions similar to what a form does. I'll put this in its own service package, and I'll name it by what it's designed to do functionally, which is create the back office functionality. So here I can create the data model, and I can specify exactly which view objects I want to enable for this particular module. So I want to see customers. I want to see orders for a particular customer. For each of those orders, I want to see the items. And for each of the items, I want to view the inventory. And that I can use my new link here for. Alright, so we've created a data model that we can then use for this building this application. I can go ahead and run this module, which brings up a tester, and it allows me to just test out all of the objects are mapped properly and named properly, and including the testing of the master detail data. So here's my tester. I can go in and look at customer information and orders for that particular customer. I can see the items for the particular order that I'm looking at. I see that I have a product ID listed here. And similar to in Forms, when you do kind of post-query triggers to bring in reference objects, I might want to do that for this case so that I look at a product name rather than a product ID. This is an awful lot of numbers on one page here, on one view. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'll do is I will add to the item view the ability to look up products as a reference object. And then I can add product information as an attribute. And what I want to see is the product name. Now the relation between these two objects is already created, so I can just go ahead and rerun the module. And this allows me to see that I have items for a particular order. Now I see that I have the referenced name, and I didn't have to do any further mapping or write any code.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. So the next thing we had to do was look at some of the common, let's call it properties or metadata that was in a forms application, how we could move that into the ADF application. So I mean properties such as things like the date format or the default date that we had on a number of fields. We also had in the original forms application help or tooltip information that was associated with each of the attributes or items that were in a block. So those are properties of forms items. We also had properties on blocks for things like, for example, the order by clause, where clause as well, and indications of whether a field was a primary key, where that could be updated or queried. So the next task we had in redeveloping the forms application was looking for those properties of forms items and implementing that same functionality in our ADF application. So let's show in the demo how we implemented the labels, tooltips, and format masks.
Okay, so here we're looking at the orders entity object. So this is the kind of transactional object for orders. And if we want to do things like set format masks and default values, for example, we can do that very easily here. So we can look at things like the order filled attribute, and we can set the order filled default to be n for we know that to be no, and we can also do things like set the date ordered to the current date. And so the way that we do that is by using an expression, and it's ADF dot current date. So now we've got a couple of default values. Let's go ahead and add some new labels in. So for that, we'll enter these labels in the view object, and we have the same attributes present here. And so we can go ahead and look at the UI hints tab, and we can add in labels like customer, date ordered with a space, sales rep with a space, label of order total, etc. Okay, so we've created some labels. Now we can go ahead and create some tooltips as well. Enter customer name, enter order total, and the like. Another thing that we can do is we can set the format masks here. So we can look at things like this date ordered is a date, what format type do we want this to be, and what type of date format do we want to use. We can use any of the different format masks that are standard here. We can also specify that total is a currency, so that shows up with an appropriate currency symbol. Now one thing that's also happened is that as we set labels and tooltips, those things were added to this properties bundle, so that we can see there's some others that have been created here. But what we see is that our message strings weren't simply hard-coded, but that ADF was setting us up for success so that we have followed best practices and we have implemented these labels using a properties file so that we can later internationalize the application or localize these message strings.
So once we had a good cut of the business service or the data model, we then wanted to start implementing validation features that were existing in the forms applications. So there were two different types of validation we had in the forms. Some of the validation was defined through properties, for example, lowest allowed value, highest allowed value, or we had code written either when validate item triggers at block or item level. So for example, date shipped must be greater than the date ordered, so you can't order something after it's shipped. And validation such as ensuring product ID was valid. And there's two simple examples of forms triggers where we had to write code to perform that functionality. So how could we do the same validation triggers in the ADF application? So let's hand over again to Lynn to show this part of the demo.
Right, so we can create validators in a number of different ways here. What we're looking at first is the orders entity object. So if we want to create some validation or some business rules, we can do that by, for example, if we select an attribute and add a new validator, we can choose different types of built-in validators. We might compare against another value or a SQL query. We can choose a range validator just to choose values for the high and low thresholds for this particular attribute. We can also choose to create record level validators. So this is across this orders entity record. What we want to create here is a new rule, and so this rule type is going to be a comparison validator. We're going to look at date shipped, and date shipped must be greater than or equal to another attribute, and date ordered is the other type of date that we can compare against here. And so we can specify the failure message, and we'll say you cannot have a shipping date that is before the order date. Okay, so we've created that as a error, and so now if this validation rule fails, regardless of the type of user interface that's built on top of this entity object or any view object that's built on top of this entity object, indeed that validation rule will be applied. So we've got a bit of reuse happening here, as well as, again, the message strings being stored automatically for me in a resource bundle. Okay, back to you, Grant.
So we then looked at other common forms features and how we could redevelop that same functionality in ADF. And the next area we looked at were things like lists of values. So in the forms world, you can have a record group, which is a select statement, and assign that record group to as a list of values on an item. So we wanted to have that same functionality in ADF. So for example, on a list of products, that we could have a pop-up or a choice list or some other way of choosing those values rather than entering it directly. So let's have a look at how we implemented our list of values in our ADF application.
So to create the list of values for a particular object, we'll look at the view object. And for example, let's look at order filled first of all here. So if we choose this list of values tab, as we're looking at the order filled attribute, we can create a new list of values, and we can base it on any type of data source. In this case, we have a static data source that returns yes or no, and we can choose which attribute we want to map against here. So our order filled is going to be our view attribute, and it's going to be populated from the data value from the list. And then we can go ahead and look at the UI hints, and we can say, right, the value that we actually want the user to select from, or the display label, will be the string value. And we can choose that this is going to be a radio group as the default list type. So any user interface built on top of this attribute will inherit these properties and will default to a radio group style of UI component, whatever that UI might be, whether it's web or mobile or thick client. So we've got that created. Now we can create another type of list of values, more of a traditional combo box list of value, and we'll do that for the sales rep. So we'll create a list of values for the sales rep ID, and we'll use this sales reps VO, which is basically returning all of the sales reps in the application. And I want to retrieve the ID and map the sales rep ID for the orders view object to the ID in the list object. And then I can go ahead and select what the display attributes should be. So we'll choose first name, last name. We'll create this as a combo box with LOV. Okay, so that's how we implement list of values.
Now, in the original Forms application, there were some non-database items such as calculated fields. So for example, we had a non-database item on a block called item total. And item total was a formula which based on the quantity shipped times the price. So we wanted to implement that same calculated function in our ADF application as well. So let's have a look at how we did calculated fields.
So for calculated fields, we're looking at the items view object, and we want to multiply the quantity times the price and return that as the calculated item total. So we can go ahead and add that attribute, and we'll just name it item total. And then we can supply the default value. So just like we've provided default values for other attributes, in this case we'll say that this is going to be an expression. I can click the little pencil icon to get a better editor here, and I'll just use a little expression to multiply quantity unless it's null by the price, unless that's null. So a little ternary expression here to determine that. And we can define that anytime that the quantity or price changes, we want to recalculate this calculated attribute. Okay, so we've got this transient attribute created in addition to all of the other attributes. So now if we run this application module, we can go ahead and look at orders for a particular customer, and we see indeed that there are lookups for sales rep ID. If I create a new record, we see that the date ordered is defaulting to the current date. If I try to create a date shipped value that is before the date ordered and submit that or commit that record, we see our error message coming through here. We can correct that issue and choose our sales rep from the sales rep ID LOV. We see that the order filled is defaulting to the no in the radio button, and order total is coming through as a currency. Now if we go ahead and commit this record and we navigate to another record that has some orders, then we can look at the items for that order, and we see that the item total is being calculated. If I change the quantity, then we see that the item total is being updated appropriately.
We also took the opportunity to go through the Forms application and look at the various triggers that were involved and whether we needed to migrate or rewrite the code from those triggers into ADF. Now, the couple of things we noticed when we did with this was that some of the triggers were no longer required. for example, if they were to do with master detail coordination or particular features that were handled automatically with ADF, in which case we didn't have to make any rewrite or migration of the code there. Where we did look at some code that needed to be implemented, we did find a number of points in ADF which gave us quite a very close mapping to the exact same features in the forms applications. So for example, the pre-insert, pre-delete, or these transaction triggers were all mapped to areas in the DML, on DML, within the ADF application as well. So we could implement functionality that was in trigger points also in the ADF, where there's a very close mapping as well. And you can see those in the final application that we built and wrote up, which is available in OTN, and the URLs at the end of this presentation. So once we'd had our business service developed and implemented validation, lists, etc., we then looked at the form navigation. Now typically in the forms application this involved writing code to do open form, call form, or any of the navigation such as go block. And these were often placed in when button pressed or item triggers. So again, it happens to be that to implement that same functionality in ADF actually involved pretty much a codeless solution using the ADF controller. And let's have a look at how we developed this in the ADF application.
Right, so to create the navigation for our application, we'll actually use an ADF task flow to do this. So we'll create a new task flow, and we'll name it Create Edit Orders Task Flow. And we'll create this using page fragments so that we get reusable pages here. We already have a page created, and we can drag that onto the task flow diagram so that we have a visual view of the navigation throughout the application. This is pretty nice. And we can add additional components here. So we'll add a view called Orders. And then we can add some navigational cases. Between the two objects. I'll add another navigation case for returning. So what we've done is we've defined with strings the navigation between one page and another so that these pages can change, the navigation can change, and we don't have to actually change the individual pages. We don't have to have a maintenance nightmare if the way the user navigates throughout the application changes. We can modify this one file, and we save ourselves from having to update multiple pages.
So once we get the navigation completed, we're looking at building the user interface pages as well. Now, many of the features that you have in forms applications, text fields, checkboxes, buttons, menu items, have existing components in the ADF world as well. So you can create applications that look and probably behave in a very similar way to the forms applications using ADF. But we also took the opportunity to embrace a little bit of change. So while we do have the same concepts of buttons, tabbed canvases, etc., we introduced some different components, or took the opportunity to add these into the ADF application rather than just doing a like-for-like UI. So let's show how we developed some of the UI pages in the ADF application.
Okay, so let's create the page fragment that will display details about and orders for a particular customer. So we'll go ahead and start by creating a new page fragment. We'll name it Orders. And I'll start by creating just a blank page so I can use a couple of layout components and show you what those look like. So I'll create a stretchable outer frame with a panel stretch layout. And within that component, I'll add a panel group layout. Now I want to view orders for a particular customer. We created that in our data model, And our data model is represented in the data controls palette. So I can expand the customer's data control, and I can see a collection of orders for a customer. So this is the collection that I want to use. This is, again, just a representation of every collection, attribute, method, and built-in operation provided by ADF Business Components. So here I'll drag this onto the visual editor and create this orders for customer collection as a form. So this is creating the binding to the underlying component as well as creating the UI components. Now I can delete the attributes that I don't need to see. And I can change the rows property or any of the properties on the layout components to get a different type of layout. I'll also go ahead and reorder some of these components. And now I'll add in additional components here. So I'll add in a splitter. And the first facet of the splitter, I'll add in a box to display the items for this particular order. And I can again just drag in the items for this order and choose how I want to display this collection. In this case, I'll choose to display this as a table. I can reorder the columns. And I can implement row selection for a single row just simply by clicking the radio button, and I can enable sorting by checking a box, which is a great time saver if you've ever had to code that in a web application yourself. The second facet will create an accordion, and this will give us an image of the currently selected product. So again, I'll just drag and drop layout components and data components onto the visual editor and set properties in order to augment the way that these things are displayed. So now if I want to link to an image, I can just use an expression. This is expression language, or EL. It's just a basic kind of block.item way of referring to an object. So in this case, images/products directory, and then we'll look up the name of the image according to an attribute that was bound to this object. So we're looking at image name from DB, and the value that we want is the input value. And now I'll go ahead and run this page just to test what I've done so far. So when I run the application, I see some customer information, and if I look at the orders page, which is what I've just created, this fragment shows me that yes, I've got all of the UI components. I've got a little bit of layout issue to resolve here, but I do have the functionality of the table component. I can reorder these table components. I'm updating the image. In this case, it's the same image for both products. And I see a product ID with a LOV, and I am able to view the table and the image data. So now let's go ahead and modify this. I'm just going to change the splitter to have a different default position, and I want to stretch the last column of the table, and I also want to stretch the splitter. And now if I save and refresh the browser, I see that if I look at my orders fragment, the layout issue is resolved, and if I update the row selection, then I do see the image refreshed as well. So we've got that part pretty well locked down. Let's do some additional work here on this orders dashboard component. So now we'll modify the customers page, the customers fragment, and I'm looking at the dashboard tab, and I've got 3 panel boxes here inside of a dashboard component. So I can modify the text properties of these panel boxes to make them more indicative of what they're showing. So we'll have order history box, a shipping time, and order proportion. Now for history, what we'll look at is the date that a product was ordered, and we get that information from our orders for customer. So we'll drag that onto the visual editor, and this time we'll choose to display the collection as a graph. This will be a bar chart, and the bars will be the total, and the x-axis will look at the date ordered. For shipping time, we want to look at the same collection, in this case we're looking at the time to ship for the date ordered. And for the order proportion, we'll look at the orders in a pie chart. The pie will be the total, and the slices will be the ID of the order. I'll just very quickly set the pie graph to be 3D. Alright, looks good. So let's go ahead and refresh the browser. So if we look at a customer that has multiple orders here, we can see the order history, shipping time, and order proportion bar chart and pie charts are created. They're updated as we navigate through the different orders. And you can see how easy it is to build really nice looking dashboards very quickly. I didn't write any code to do this. So this is our full Summit ADF application, and this entire application is available on OTN for you to download. So you can take a look at the actual code and check my work here throughout the demo.
So as you've seen, we've been able to redevelop the Forms application using ADF and map many of the concepts we had in Forms to features in ADF as well. Now the application that we redeveloped has been written up in a white paper, and we'll give you the URL at the end of this presentation. But we wanted to close off by highlighting a number of what we think are critical questions you should be asking if considering a redevelopment. The first is, why do you want to migrate? Are you migrating for the right reasons? Are you migrating because you think that your Forms application has to be migrated? Do you think you're forced to migrate? Are you looking to implement exactly as the application you had before? Or are you looking to make changes and embrace change and have the opportunity that while your redevelopment is going on to do things different or add new functionality or business processes? Should you be building to the strengths of your new technology, or are you forcing your redevelopment to heavily lean on the concepts and ways you built things in the past? Really, you should be looking at embracing the change, and you really should be looking at planning to re-architect as well. Forms applications and ADF applications can do things in very different ways, and you should be looking at embracing the changes and architecting for the changes involved in adopting a new technology such as Java. Who are your developers? Are you building for Forms developers, Java developers? What are your end users expecting? Do they require the same heavily data entry style of application, or can you afford to do things a little bit different? What's the business expecting out of this redevelopment? It's going to be quite a considerable cost and risk for redevelopment. What will the business get from this? And what are the recommendations that you're seeing from Oracle on how to do things? And there are a number of points that we think is important to, again, respond with. That Oracle has been through this redevelopment with their e-business suite, which is originally developed in Forms and has been redeveloped using ADF. We feel that ADF aids the re-architecture because it does implement J2E design patterns, but provides declarative development that will be familiar to those who have maybe built your Forms applications, and it provides a mapping of concepts that you had in Forms into the ADF world as well. And I think it's worth recognizing that this is proven technology because we've been using it with our e-business suite. But while we've tried to show that many of the concepts map in ADF does help, there is no magic bullet. Any redevelopment of a Forms application into the Java world will require serious amounts of effort involving in re-architecture, redevelopment and testing. So there's no magic bullet to make this thing happen with just a click of a button. For more information, you can go to the JDeveloper page on OTN, or we've created some specific links here that if you want to find out about Oracle Forms strategy, how to modernize Oracle Forms, an article on Forms migration, and the white paper, which is this case study of the application redevelopment you've just seen, is also available as well. Thank you very much for listening.